friends, and welcome to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm Ashley Cipoletti, your host, and I'm on a mission to create more connection. Dogs are really just the starting point. Together, we'll explore how to live with more harmony, ease, and healing so we can show up more as the best version of ourselves, not just for our dogs, but also for our community and our planet too. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. Have you ever felt pressured to do something that you really didn't want to do, but you did it anyways? And if so, how did that make you feel? Today, we're going to dive into how we can unintentionally put pressure on our dogs and how sometimes a little pressure can be helpful and you can grow and sometimes do things that you otherwise wouldn't have grown out of your comfort zone to do. But then there's a line, and there's a line where it can dip into this can be really overwhelming, distressing, and maybe even traumatic. All right, let's dive in. So there's lots of different types of pressure, right? There's physical pressure, emotional pressure, perceived pressure, spatial pressure, and those are all things that we can unintentionally or intentionally be applying to our dogs. There's some training styles that rely heavily on putting spatial and sometimes physical pressure and emotional pressure on dogs. A common example I see that a lot of people do is when you're trying to teach your dog to sit and you put your hands on their bum or their back and you push down until they sit. That's physical pressure. There's also spatial pressure. So you could see this actually a lot on TV shows, like when Cesar Millan had his show. You could see that he would be putting on some spatial pressure to get dogs that were posturing to be a little bit like to be aggressive to back down. So he might not have actually been physically touching them, but he's coming into their space. And this is something that happens, especially in shelter environments. If a dog is in a kennel feeling threatened and you have to take the dog out, naturally you're putting on spatial pressure. You're coming into their space. And every dog is going to have a different bubble that they feel comfortable with, of another individual coming into their space. Some, it might be like a 7 or 10 foot radius. Some it might be larger. Some it might be smaller. And we have that spatial pressure and personal bubble space too. If you ever think about how uncomfortable it can feel if somebody just sits right next to you in an open space, if you're like, dude, there's like all these chairs and tables around, why are you sitting right next to me? It's it can be like almost like a posturing for conflict or make you feel threatened because you're like, what is this person going to do? Especially if it's a stranger. Now, if a friend came over and sat right next to you in your personal space, suddenly that shifts, right? You might not perceive that to be uncomfortable. You might actually welcome that, enjoy it, like it. So this is an important thing to think about. And the relationship that you have with the dog can kind of influence how they tolerate the pressure that you put on them. So we have that, again, actual physical pressure where you're touching them. Then there's the spatial pressure where you're coming into their space. There's also emotional pressure. If you think about with like teenagers, it comes up a lot of peer pressure, right? And we still get peer pressured as adults all the time. But that's a really common one of like, oh God, like, go kiss like Timmy or something, and then like they're like, oh, like all nervous and do it anyways. It's like you could like other peers can put on a lot of emotional pressure to do something, whether that's to be perceived as cool or like, part of the in group, or we can put on even emotional pressure on ourselves of thinking, okay, like, I need to be training this skill 5 times a week, every day. If I'm not working on it enough, I'm not a good enough dog parent. And I also need to be going to the gym and doing this and doing that. You're putting a lot of emotional pressure on yourself. For humans, we can do that with our verbal language a lot. And for dogs, it would be more of like, okay, are we pressuring them to maybe like interact with someone that they don't want to, or pressuring them to have a response? And so something I see a lot in dog training is people have different like awarenesses and almost like levels of this pressure. And some people put on a lot of pressure without realizing it, even if you're using treats. So just because we are giving a dog a treat does not necessarily mean that it is a positive emotional experience for a dog. There is a lot of method to the madness and how we use food. And you can use food to apply a lot of pressure and make things feel a little icky. And sometimes it can be used to put some pressure on or to take some pressure off if we get really crafty about how we use food. And so something I see a lot with dog training clients is we are like, okay, paid for the training session. We're automatically going to be applying emotional pressure for this hour session that you paid for, right? You're like, okay, we got to get, this output out of what I'm investing in. So we're coming in being like, we got to get these results. And we already have our preconceived notions about what's going to happen. And then let's say we put the dog on a leash and harness. Even putting on that equipment is filled with emotional, spatial, and physical pressure. Some dogs that are really sensitive to that see you come into their space holding the equipment and are out. They're like, nope, this is really uncomfortable. I'm avoiding conflict. I don't like how this makes me feel. And sometimes we can mislabel that as like they hate their harness. They might. I don't think we can rule that out. There are some harnesses that are really uncomfortable and can cause pain. Or sometimes dogs associate the equipment with going outside, which could either create big happy feelings or big scary feelings. And sometimes I think this happens more often than not. I see this just with dogs really sensitive to spatial and physical pressure. It's just somebody's coming right into their space, putting it on, or they might have a learned history of feeling forced to sit still for putting the equipment on. So if they try to run away, people grab their legs, their ears, and like hold them in ways that are uncomfortable and hurt. So they're learning to avoid that. So that's a very common place that we put pressure on. So in this generic training session we're going to talk about, we already have our preconceived notions putting on emotional pressure. Now we're already putting on some spatial and physical pressure by putting on that equipment. And let's say we have that and we've got our treats, right? And we're like, okay, we're going to use positive reinforcement. Let's say we're going through the motions of teaching the basics of like how to mark and reinforce and what that means and charging up a marker word. So for those of you that don't know, marker training is referring to essentially a positive reinforcement training technique where a specific sound or signal called a marker is used to tell the animal exactly when they've done something right. It's essentially a way to like mark the precise moment a desired behavior occurs so the animal clearly understands what earned the reward. So we condition what's called a marker word or marker sound to be like, okay, you hear this click or you hear the word yes, and we pair that with food about a second after. So anyways, say we're going over those basics and we're like, okay, we already have a lot of this pressure put on. Now we take out our food and we're like, okay, we're going to teach them what this word means. And let's say the dog is just distracted looking around and we're like, okay, they need to be like focused on what we're going to teach them, right? So some people might then put on the leash, bring them closer. That's more spatial and physical pressure and emotional pressure. And then, usually you don't have to have the dog do anything for this. You just start pairing the sound with food, sound, food, sound, food. But sometimes people will get really hung up on, well, they need to be looking at me first. And that's a good, second or third step. But I think, again, if you're trying to get that, people will put pressure and then they might be like, all right, I'm going to take food in my hand and put it up to my forehead and get them to do the behavior, which is something, it's kind of a combination of what's called luring and capturing. You're almost like getting the dog to do the skill because you're setting the stage with the food, capturing the moment that they did it. You're not forcing their eyes to look to you, but you're kind of staging it, something that is common, versus the dog just naturally thinking to look at you and then not working. That would be called shaping. And so what can happen when we take our treats out and we put it on our forehead, we're putting, again, a little bit more pressure on. We're like, okay, this is something I want you to do. You're doing it great. They did it. For some dogs that are really conflict avoidant or sensitive, even this could be too much pressure for them. That they might want to look away, walk away, sniff, scratch, disengage. Those are all like levels of stress or them trying to be like, I really want to avoid conflict here. Whereas some other dogs that don't have that like low threshold for pressure would be like, game on, let's go, So it's important to just note that any type of training we do is going to have a different effect on every single dog. So understanding that treats can still put pressure on. We can also put pressure on them by, let's say your dog is spooked by strangers and you really want them to become friends with the stranger. So a really common thing that I've seen people do is basically like Hansel and Gretel them like closer to the scary person, or the scary person's hand feeding them, and then like sneaks in for pets. So that would be, you're using food to get them to get closer. So you're putting on that emotional, spatial, and sometimes physical pressure to get closer to something they're scared of. And then if a dog really is averse to being physically touched by strangers, can't imagine what that would be like. I know I wouldn't want to be touched by a stranger. Then what can happen is they're going to associate food, getting closer from humans, equating to this really big, uncomfortable, unpleasant thing. So again, just because we're using food does not mean we're using positive reinforcement accurately or effectively, and doesn't mean that we're not putting unnecessary pressures onto our dog. Now, in the same example with a dog that is fearful, if we're using food to help with their feelings about strangers, a game I like to do instead is being, again, cognizant of the spatial pressure, that invisible little bubble around a dog that they feel comfortable with, and looking at what distance do they naturally choose to be at when they are seeing a guest. So some are going to choose to just hang out about like 15 feet, maybe like 20 feet, maybe 30 feet. You never know. And that distance that they're naturally at is the distance that I think their handler or whoever they're comfortable with could just start like tossing a treat to like the left, to the right, to the left, to the right, or a little bit closer than far away, a little bit closer than far away. I prefer to do a left to right as opposed to closer and then away, because if you toss the treat too close, you can accidentally put on too much pressure for some dogs. So I prefer to do like a left to the right, where it's like they're still at that distance, but they're moving their bodies around. And movement can be really good at calming physical bodies down and mental bodies down. So I just feel like it's a really nice way to get dogs out of this like fixation of being terrified and just get them moving. And then if the dog naturally comes in closer, I like to toss a treat away. So the dog is choosing themselves to essentially like cut down on that spatial pressure, and you're removing the pressure by tossing the treat farther away. And then they get to opt back in on this little treat tossing game if they come closer to you, and you can toss it away. And what happens when you do this is, because you're removing the pressure and you're not getting them to inch closer and closer and closer, they have some choice in the matter of, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I want to be over here. And you're like, that's fine, I respect that. Here you go, la la la. And then when they decide to come in closer, you're like, oh, cool, well, you don't have to. And you just start to see them actually choose to get closer to the scary thing, because you're removing that pressure. So it's pretty cool. Versus if you're getting them closer and closer and closer and closer, you usually see dogs tense more and more and more and more, freeze, lean away, or they'll get close to the scary person and have their whole body weight pushed back. And they'll come in maybe to sniff to get more information. And that's usually when people make the mistake of thinking they want to be pet. And then the scary person touches the fearful dog, therefore creating again a memory of, yep, new people are scary. They touch me when I don't want to be touched, like solidifying that belief. So another common example of that pressure. But there are sometimes these like sneaky moments of pressure that I want to talk about. And some of them are, let's say like when we're asking our dog to do really any kind of cue or behavior, usually like a lot of dogs will only sit if they're in front of you. It's very common. So we'll take a step into their space, do the cue for sit, and a lot of times dogs will sit in a comfortable environment. Then when you change the environment, they might not. They might look away. They might pretend to sniff. Now we're getting some of those lower level signs of stress, overwhelm, confusion, conflict avoidance type behaviors. And people tend to be unaware that them asking their dog to do a behavior is inherently putting some pressure on them. And I'm not saying no pressure is the end goal here. I'm just saying to be aware of it and that it will have a different effect on different dogs. So if you notice, if the environment changed and you're putting on the same pressure that you do inside, but now you're doing it in a different room or outside, or if the door's open and they're not able to do the skill, I think that's information. And I think when we then look at it as, oh, our dog is being disobedient, and then think, how do we get them to do this? Or else we're like, I gotta yank on their neck, pull on or push on their back, yell at them, or go, hey, sit, we are now trying to just get a behavior, but we're missing out on what that information about them feeling a little overwhelmed or uncomfortable could be telling us in that scenario. So I had a dog client the other day where we were doing this, and I think to the untrained eye, he looks way over exuberant. He's like crazy pants, barking, pulling, jumping, lunging, all the things, and has worked on like a really solid sit in certain areas of the house. But then when we take him out to the front door and ask him to sit and the door's closed, he really struggles doing it and starts vocalizing and pacing and scratching and like looking in any direction except up at you, where in an environment that he's comfortable in and has practiced in, he will look up at you and is like, yeah, let's do training. I'm enjoying it. And the only thing that really switched here is the environment we're practicing in, even in the same house. And so in that moment, I had a couple options and choices, and I thought, okay, could this be just so exciting for him? Because he's like, oh my God, I'm going to get outside and like I can't learn and focus. I'm just like so pumped. It's like trying to do math at Disney World. Maybe. Could it have been, this is just like a lot of pressure and I need more time? Maybe. Or could it be, I haven't practiced these skills in different locations yet? And dog trainers know that dogs usually need to practice. We call it generalizing the skill in different spaces. Maybe. So I tried to test out each one of those options to get a better feel for how this dog could actually be feeling and what they needed. And so I tried at first. I was like, let me just see if I like can lure him into the sit. And that felt a little icky to me. I was like, I can, but I was getting just a feel. The more you do this, you get a feel for dogs. I was like, this isn't feeling right. This isn't like feel like he's enthusiastic about this. This feels like actually a little bit too much pressure. So I nixed that idea. Then I just thought, okay, what if I just give him more time and I sit in the discomfort of him not doing a behavior in a training session, and I just patiently wait for him to have some time and see if then he can re-engage with me and do the behavior that we've practiced a lot. And I tried that, and it was uncomfortably long the time it took for him to just be staring at the floor or like the door and sniffing. And eventually though, he did look up and sat, and I rewarded that. And I was like, wow. And that actually felt energetically wise, I think really good, where he needed a minute to just gather himself. And I feel like, yeah, just in this little example, as I was trying to test out different things and see just what felt right for him. As you get to know dogs, you start to feel their norm and when they're feeling enthusiastic and confident and calm. And you also can feel when you're like, I think there's some miscommunication here, or I'm missing the ball here. I encourage people to get curious of that. And this is something that within positive reinforcement, I'm using treats, right? Can put on more pressure or take off pressure. And also I could have sat there and really forced it and been like, sit, and like done that whole thing. I didn't do that. I honestly just took a breath and waited and got curious. And so I thought to myself, how long would it take for him to offer this behavior that he has been offering all of the time, the eye contact, if I just kind of back off? And I'm okay with it not looking how I want it to look. And I'm just curious. And I was curious too. I'm like, does he just need a little help to remember how to sit in this new space with a couple lures? And I was like, I don't think it's that. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. And the more that I've learned this about this specific dog and given him a little bit more time, before rushing through things, I've noticed that he like bites the leash less and barks less, which again would tell me then I think those behaviors are stemming from overwhelm, excitement, frustration, confusion. So really cool when you back off, you start to see these behaviors that a lot of people would label as naughty or bad or disobedient as actually being clues to how they are feeling in a given moment. And when we drop our ego and are like, this might not go how I expect it, let's just get curious here, you see a lot start to unfold. And there's also, again, there's a line where if I just sat there forever and never put any pressure on what should he be doing or guiding him, we wouldn't be progressing through our training goals. Just to be honest, it's like we wouldn't. It would feel a little bit more like a little chaotic. So some pressure, again, to help dogs like adapt in our human worlds and learn, some pressure is going to be inherently there and needed. But I think there's a lot of power to just being aware of, if I do this or if I back off, then what? And I see a lot of owners always just standing in their space, leaning over them, touching them, yelling at them, or using treats kind of like just frantically. And that's all putting, again, a lot of pressure. And we think, oh, the dog's got to do this thing. Or maybe you've been doing your homework in between sessions and you're pumped, and then your trainer comes over and they're not doing the skill, and you feel that pressure of like, oh my God, the trainer wants me to do this, I have to do it. And then you're putting that pressure on your dog as well. So yeah, interesting little thought experiment there. And thinking about too on this concept, the pressure that we put on ourselves, especially for training outcomes. So if you're working on reactivity, you can think, okay, I need to be doing like all these enrichment things per day, per week, and working on these skills. I need to make sure I'm keeping them safe and I'm calm, cool, and collected, and they can't have any reactions. Otherwise, it's going to be this habit. Like, can you already hear it from my voice of how much pressure that is that you're putting on yourself for a training goal? So sometimes I'll have clients that I'm just like, take the pressure off, take a week off, just like, don't work on any of the things for that training goal and see how that feels. And a lot of times you see actually people really make a ton more progress when they take the pressure off of themselves and their dog. And I'm like, no, or just do something that feels like the path of least resistance, where you're most successful. It feels the least overwhelming to you as well. And it's okay. Here's your permission to take the pressure off. And just being aware again too of, are we pressured? Like, how does it feel when we do things that we don't want to do, but we do it anyways for everyone else? It can honestly get you sick over time if you are always just doing things everybody else wants you to do, but you don't actually want to do yourself. And sometimes, again, people can pressure you to do things that will help you grow. So the outcome of what happens when you feel pressured and your perception of the outcome will honestly tell your brain and body whether that was eustress, which is good stress, which is like, okay, this is helpful and needed to grow, or if it was distress, which is, oh my gosh, that was terrible, I never want to experience that again. It can start this shame spiral and be more harmful to the body. So perception of the pressure being put on is big. And when we don't know how our dogs are going to be perceiving things, I think it's important to do these little tests in your training of take the pressure off. What happens? If you give them a break or an opt-out, what happens? A lot of times, if you give dogs more breaks and say, okay, I'll do and more times to opt out of training, by taking the pressure off, a lot of times they actually opt in more frequently with more enthusiasm, and they do the skills faster and more reliably as well once you take that pressure off and allow them that space to say no thank you. And sometimes a dog will be doing the behaviors. So again, to the untrained eye, that dog looks like they're being quote unquote obedient, and you take the pressure off and they avoid, they leave, they walk away, they look away. That tells you that the way you're training is hard for them. It's putting a lot of pressure on for them, and they need some time. And maybe we need to revisit how we're teaching that dog, even with food. So just because we think we're using positive reinforcement does not mean that we are and that it's perfect and that our dogs feel amazing about it. We really need to be curious. And I don't expect everybody who gets a dog to become a professional dog trainer. So we also have to remember the skill set of the owners and just being realistic. Are they going to go, most people are not going to go through an intensive dog training program to know how to train their dogs. So figuring out how do we get people and their dogs to just live in harmony together, good enough without perfect training. And if it feels complicated or like a tricky dog, or you're overwhelmed or confused, getting help, because this isn't a skill that you're born with. Dog trainers literally go to school for it, learn tons of books, go to webinars for it, practice, get their hands on a lot of dogs. So again, you're not born knowing how to dog train. Get help if you need it. And if this episode hasn't already got your brain spinning, I'm going to do a little mic drop at the end here for you to consider and think about the complexities of being a social creature. Like us, dogs are social. They have these social structures. And in social systems, sometimes we do behaviors to appease, to relieve pressure, to bond and connect, to play, to have fun. And I would even argue just to, be weird. It feels good. Who knows? If anyone was analyzing the behavior that any of us do on a given day, I'm sure you could come up with a lot of weird things that we do that we're not even conscious of. So thinking about with our dogs, how many behaviors or body language signs they might be giving off that can be more complex than they seem. Like maybe, your dog looks eager to do something that you asked, but is it because they actually find it fun, or is it because they're trying to appease you? And how many of us can think back to things that we've done to appease others and put a smile on, or we laugh when we don't think things are funny, or we say, oh my God, no, it's totally okay, it's fine. And it's not fine. And then you get in your car and you're like, I hated that. I never want to see that person again. So thinking about how, because again, we have this social system with our dog, there might be some behaviors that can feel confusing, because I think it's just one of those things we have to remember is we will never fully know what another's experience is and how they are feeling. And so we can take our best bet, our best guesses. And that's why I love to implement breaks in training and taking pressure off to see what the dog will voluntarily opt in for, and truly try to see if I can get to know a dog and implement things that are more fun and focus more on the relationship of like, hey, you can trust me. I'm safe. I can listen to you. I check in. I care. And some people maybe won't be there yet to be able to do that with animals, because they might still struggle to do that with people and with themselves. So realizing that, we can think about this, and there's always going to be people who don't have time for that, who don't view animals in that way. We're all in our own different timeline of that. But I think it is, again, a really interesting thing to think about. So I wanted to leave you with that and encourage you to take the pressure off yourself sometimes and see what happens if you take the pressure off your dog. What happens? Let me know. Thanks for hanging out with me on the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. If you love this episode, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed, left a review, and shared with a friend. Your support helps more people and their dogs find a little more ease and connection in their lives. Want to dive deeper? Follow me on Instagram at Co-Regulated Canines. That's CO_regulated, the letter K, the number 9S, or head to www.coregulatedcanines.com for more resources. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your pup, and keep building those connections.